Believe it or not, there actually is something called Pollyanna syndrome, and people who are enablers of narcissists are very likely to be suffering from this condition. Now, they don't seem to be suffering because, well, they seem to be very happy people. They have a positive outlook on life. Therein lies the problem. So, number one, Pollyanna syndrome. Well, what is it? Well, I looked it up and did some research, and what I discovered is that Pollyanna syndrome is a focus on the positive while ignoring the negative. Have you ever traveled? I'm assuming that you have taken vacations, trips, whatever. Have you ever checked into a motel and discovered that the motel room was unkept at best? I haven't had a lot of those experiences because, quite frankly, a motel room for me, if I'm staying there just overnight, it doesn't have to be perfect. I don't have to stay in the best hotels, motels with all the trimmings. But I recall coming back from Florida a few years ago with my wife and grandkids, and we stayed in this room. I mean, literally, the paint was peeling off the walls, and it was tiny. There were 4 of us trying to stay in this one motel room, and there wasn't room to even lay on the floor, to put out a sleeping bag. 2 beds, but nowhere else to sleep. And we complained about it, and they wouldn't do anything about it. So eventually the story is that I actually called the Attorney General of that state. I think it was Tennessee, whatever. And they went out and inspected and made them clean up their act. And so I also called the credit card company, and they refunded my money. So kind of a, nice positive outcome to that. Meanwhile, we stayed at a different motel. Now, supposing we had gone into that trashy motel room, and instead of saying this place is a dump, we had said, this is quaint. I mean, wow, let's have an adventure. This is a really, who needs to sleep? Maybe we can all sleep in the same bed, and that'll be fun, right? I mean, in other words, you take this very negative experience, and you try to spin it and flip it upside down so that it is a positive experience, when obviously that's not what's going on. What does that have to do with narcissists? Well, there's some people that we call enablers, who will stand by their man or woman, the narcissist, not because they necessarily know these people or even like these people, but because they're in denial. They're just not willing to face up to the fact this is a bad person, usually. Why would they do that? I mean, the guy's obviously a bad guy, and maybe to the enabler, the Pollyanna syndrome enabler, maybe this is not a bad person. Maybe they just don't see it. Maybe, well, more likely, this is a person who has a worldview where everything is good. They just kind of see everybody. We talked about this in other videos, but everybody wears a white hat except for the very obvious bad guy, and he wears a black hat, but those are few and far between. There are no gray areas. I mean, in reality, everybody wears a gray hat. Some hats are darker gray than others if black is the bad guy and white is the good guy, white hat. So everybody wears a gray hat. Some of them are light gray, some of them are medium gray. There's a spectrum. But the Pollyanna syndrome enabler doesn't see that. He prefers, or she prefers, to see everybody with white hats, with the rare exception where it's just, like a serial killer. I mean, it's just too hard to deny. And these people are enabling a narcissist who is hurting you, and almost certainly is hurting or has hurt other people. So what they do is sometimes they will try to add meaning to the bad guy. So it was something to the effect, and religious people do this a lot. They will say, well, this is a great experience to learn something. Or maybe they will say, God is teaching you a lesson. God is using this to teach you a lesson. Cool, let's blame God for it. That's in my thinking, that would be heretical. You just don't do that. Got to blame God for everything bad. There's a meaning in everything, Now, do you know the name Phineas Gage? Does that ring a bell? This is a guy who lived in the 19th century. I think he died in 1860, if I remember right, and his profession was he worked on a construction crew that built railroads. And to build railroads, they had to use dynamite back in those days to clear away whatever was in the way, mountains or whatever. So there was an explosion, and it was the result of the explosion, which is fairly common in their line of work, but there was this iron rod that was sent like a bullet through Phineas Gage's head. And it's kind of an interesting study of how the brain affects our behavior, because he had an iron rod stuck in his head, and it changed his behavior. I mean, it didn't kill him. He was very fortunate that he didn't die immediately. All right. Now imagine the Phineas Gage goes to the doctor, and he says, "I got a headache." And the doctor says, "Well, it'll go away. Just take a few aspirin." I don't know if they even had aspirin back then, but But Phineas, the doctor says, you need to just think positive thoughts and get over it, because eventually this headache will go away and all will be well. And Phineas Gage responds by saying, "But doctor, I got an iron rod in my head. Do you see it?" Well, that's not what happened, fortunately, and I don't think any doctor would be dumb enough to do that, or would they? Now, there was another story, and this is a real-life story, where there was a home break-in, and the burglars, or whatever they were, shot the people who were in the house. One guy got shot in the head, and the police showed up, and they didn't know who was who, so they took this guy, the victim, the guy that had been shot, took him to the police department, and they put him in the interrogation room, and here's the guy sitting with a bullet hole in his head, and the police interrogator is drilling this guy as if he was somehow complicit in the crime. He got a bullet in his head, and the guy was, or he was shot in the head. I don't know if the bullet was still there or not, but the guy was very confused, and the assessment was he was saying things because of his confusion that were not true, in that he was using the wrong words. I mean, he would have a concept, but he couldn't pull out the word for it, so he'd use a word that was totally unrelated. Well, eventually, the interrogator realized, oh, this guy's got a bullet head, or got a bullet wound in his head. And he called the ambulance. So, what is it with people? They just don't recognize reality. So here you are, a victim of narcissism, and you have these Pollyanna enablers who are telling you to look at the bright side and, hey, this person's not so bad. And the one that I hear so often is they just don't have a filter. Well, it's true. They don't have a filter. But it's far worse than not having a filter. These people are flat out abusive narcissists. Number two is this. The reason I think the people do this is because on some level, somehow, somewhere, they are just out of touch with reality. They're just not in touch with... this narcissist is a bad person. Now, again, we said earlier, could be that the enabler, the Pollyanna syndrome enabler, is just not informed. They don't know what's going on. And I'm sorry to say that that actually fits my experience. I've done that in the past. I recall there was a person who has strong narcissistic traits who was not very kind to my parents. And I thought to myself, this person, she wouldn't hurt anybody intentionally, and they're making a big deal about this thing, and so forth and so on. But, let's hold that thought, and I'll tell you how that concludes in just a moment. All right, so they're out of touch with reality, and I call this invalidation with a smile. Because when an enabler takes that Pollyanna syndrome approach, what they're doing is they are invalidating, as a victim of narcissism, your hurt, your pain, your suffering. You've got the iron rod in your head, figuratively speaking, metaphorically speaking, and they're saying, no, you don't. No big deal. Okay, so you got a little scratch on your head. Okay, you've got a little splinter. Just totally blowing it out of proportion in the wrong way, and they smile when they say it, and they want you to smile. You ever had somebody try it when you're really upset, someone do something stupid, try to get you to laugh or try to get you to smile? That is so invalidating. That is so hurtful, and sometimes you can't help but smile. even though it's disingenuous. And they think, oh, great, I've accomplished it. I've turned the frown into a smile, taken that old frown, and I've just flipped it. But the pain is still there. I mean, these people, these enablers are just out of touch with reality. Well, why do they do that? A lot of reasons, but probably one of the most likely reasons is, besides being ignorant, which is a good reason if there is one, is sometimes they just don't like the stress. I mean, they actually recognize this is a bad person, but they don't want to deal with it, so they deny it. How do you get rid of the stress of something? You just pretend it's not there. Now, you may have heard stories or seen videos of people who are being physically beaten in public. You know, like I've seen videos of news stories of people who were attacked on a subway or a bus. And the other people on the bus would ignore it like it wasn't happening. They don't want to get involved. Well, they don't want the stress of recognizing that my immediate reality is my immediate reality. So they just ignore it. They just turn ahead and pretend, oh, was somebody getting beaten up over there? Was somebody getting robbed? You know, I saw one video a few weeks back, a couple months back now, where a woman was grabbed by her hair, some thug, and was being dragged around a subway train. And nobody intervened. Now, could be they were fearful for their safety, whatever. But a lot of people, they just kind of looked away. Well, you know, it's New York City. People do these strange things. And that's denial. They don't want the stress of intervention. They don't want to get involved, you know? So let's just pretend the narcissist, this abusive person, yeah, it's just a big deal. You're making a big deal out of nothing. That's not the way it works. Number 4 is this. The problem is with doing that is it creates cognitive dissonance in the person who is being abused. So if you're being abused by a narcissist and you have an enabler with Pollyanna syndrome who comes along and tries to shower everything with sunlight and roses, you know, rose petals, whatever, oh, come on, it's no big deal. Now you are experiencing the hurt. It probably, sometimes it's physical, but usually it's just psychological or mental, or you may be baptized in depression. I mean, it's really just that hurtful, and it can be even worse. And the enabler, the Pollyanna syndrome enabler, is telling you, it's great. I mean, you're making a big deal about this when you don't need to. You're exaggerating it when really they're the ones who are exaggerating the wrong direction. So in you, that creates cognitive dissonance. So on the one hand, something is really hurtful. On the other hand, this person is saying, no, it's not. You know, back to Phineas Gage. Now, you don't have a steel rod in your head. Okay, maybe you do, but it's not that big of a deal. You know, a lot of people have steel rods in their head and they don't whine like you do. That's cognitive dissonance. You've got these two different perspectives, reality and the Pollyanna syndrome, fake reality. Some people will do it this way. They'll say, I got to give people a chance. Speaking of the narcissist. Well, yeah, give people a chance, but this guy has had a chance, and this person's had a chance, and they fail every time. And yeah, you do need to prove people, but that's not giving them a chance. That is making sure they are up to par, and obviously the narcissist has been given a chance. There's a verse in the Bible that says something to the effect that before you appoint a deacon in a church, that individual is first to be proven. All right, so you gave them a chance and they failed. Sorry, you cannot be a deacon. That is so common. Let's say, speaking of physicians, let's say that you want to be a surgeon. Guess what? Before you can be a surgeon, number 1, you got to go to school. Number 2, you got to be tested. And number 3, you need to be proven. At least that's the way it used to be. Now they're hiring just about anybody. But you need to be proven before they let you in the, what do you call it, surgery room? I don't know what you call it. But that applies to just about every occupation. You know, anything you do. I've got a pickup truck that needs to be painted. I don't want someone to practice painting my truck. I want someone who has been proven, who has a track record. You ever call someone to do work in your house like a plumber? You probably want references. You want somebody who is proven. Now, the narcissist, the attitude of the Pollyanna syndrome enabler is, oh, come on, give them a chance. No, that's not the way to do it. They got to be proven first. That is something that all of us need to be held to, not just the narcissist, but everybody. Well, somebody may get it wrong. Okay, well, if you don't do that, you're definitely going to get it wrong. Number 5 is this. Here's the deal. The person who is enabling the narcissist, and that includes me because I've done this before. The problem is they don't have a point of reference. That is to say, they have not experienced this person. So I was telling earlier about my parents, and there was this narcissist or person with narcissistic tendencies, controller in their life, making their life just flat out miserable. And my response was something to the effect, she doesn't mean it. She may not have a filter, but, just give her a chance. And that's the way it was until I became the victim. Suddenly, and unfortunately, this was after my parents had passed away, but then I saw the absolute positive evil in this person. I mean, if there was such a thing as demonic possession, this person probably had a dozen legions of them. But I didn't see it. I was ignorant of it because I didn't have a point of reference, and I thought my parents were just overreacting to this person, and that I didn't think she was a good person, but I didn't think she was that bad. Not even let her come over to your house. I mean, come on, you got to be serious. Well, now this same person is totally out of my life. I wish. Unfortunately, she's still trying to make inroads. It's what they do. They don't like to lose. They're still trying to make inroads through other relatives, but that's life. So what it's called again, as you already know, is Pollyanna syndrome. It is very real, and if you have suffered abuse from a narcissist, you probably also experience that secondary abuse from these enablers. These Pollyanna syndrome enablers. 2 rectangles on the screen. That means we can keep on having a conversation if you'd like. Click on one of those 2 rectangles and the conversation will continue. If not, thanks for stopping by. And we'll see y'all next time.